G'day, kia ora, hello, and welcome to Redgate Streamed. I'm Hamish Watson, your host for this part of the day, which is a real honour because I think I'm the only person who's not a Redgate employee who's the host, which is kind of nice. I'm Hamish Watson. I am a friend of Redgate, or as we say in this part of the world, a mate of Redgate. I own my own company. I'm a director on the PASS board, which means I like to earn money, but I also like to give back to the community. And if you haven't been to one of these events before, Redgate Streamed is a series of virtual conferences bringing together a whole range of speakers, world-class speakers. And today, the event today is really a global one because we've got a full day of educational content from speakers and opportunities to network with your peers. We've got a really great lineup for you today, stretching right from now through nighttime here, daytime over in the UK. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Our first speaker is Damian Brady, who I had the pleasure of meeting, albeit virtually, in 2017. I think. Yeah, it was. At the time, Damian, you were working at Octopus, and you sent me a T-shirt from Octopus. Damian is currently working as a cloud advocate, specialising in DevOps and ML ops. And basically, after spending a year in Toronto, Canada, he returned back to Australia, the land of the dangerous creatures and beautiful beaches, in 2018. Most of the time, you're going to find Damian talking to software engineers, IT pros and managers to help them get the most out of their DevOps strategies. And Damian has his own Channel 9 show, the DevOps Lab, which is an awesome channel. In fact, I think I was on there once. I did unit testing for the databases, which was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was.
So thanks for that, mate. So without further ado, we've got a Q&A session for Damian coming up. Just a reminder that in the On24 portal, there is the Q&A box, which I'll be monitoring, and please put your questions in there, and we'll go through them. Yeah, Damian, g'day.
Hey, how's it going, Hamish?
Yeah, it's good, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, good to chat. Good to chat you two again. We you were on the DevOps Lab show not too long ago. Database testing. I do remember we got a lot of questions about that, which was I think it's one of those things that people don't always think is possible. So seeing somebody actually do it, it's made a huge difference. A lot of people interested. Yeah,
and look, like you say, databases, people always think, it's too hard to test data, right? And the really cool thing is that there's a whole number of ways that you can do it. And the really awesome thing is because, when you talk to DBAs and you say, hey, look, you can unit test your data, but, you're going to use Visual Studio and you can see they actually physically change. Like if they're standing, they'll take a step back. If they're sitting, they'll go back, and it's like, no, it's okay. You can actually use Management Studio, right? SQL Server Management Studio. There's an open source framework out there that you can actually start becoming a part of a DevOps pipeline, right? By actually start testing your data.
Yeah, exactly.
And the really cool thing is that is a way of getting them on that journey. And I mean, Redgate makes some fantastic tools, and being able to apply the changes and everything to source control. The funny thing is that nowadays, with what's been going on in the world, I mean, I'm talking here from Christchurch, Europe, I believe in Brisbane. We're doing this all remote, and I think that the more that we can do to enable us to collaborate, both in terms of speaking together, but also working with tools to collaborate. And so I guess my first question for you, just to sort of kick this off, is what are the benefits and challenges, now that we're distributed, right? All over the place. What are some of the challenges and also benefits that you see where we have those distributed workforces when they're trying to implement DevOps?
Yeah, I think it's easy to think about the benefits personally, just because I guess I've been lucky enough to work in organizations that are fairly mature in terms of DevOps for the last quite a while, which means that I don't have to worry about whether anybody thinks it's a good idea to set up these pipelines or anything. I think the best example I can come up with was when I was working at Octopus Deploy, where I worked before Microsoft, and I just moved to Canada, like you mentioned in the intro. Now in Toronto, which is kind of east coast of North America, there's no time zone overlap like with work hours with Brisbane. And I was the first person in a different time zone, which had its challenges, and we can talk about that in a sec as well. But it basically meant that the work I was doing had to be a little bit distant from the work that everybody else was doing, because there's no immediate to and fro conversations that you can have. But because we'd had this amazing kind of pipeline, that didn't really matter. We'd done a release which had this really weird kind of edge case, which somebody noticed a few hours after we'd done that release. And Australia was asleep and I was awake, but I hadn't touched any of that code at all. But because everything's in source control, I could pull it down, I could have a look. I noticed we worked out pretty quickly what the problem was. And I made that change and committed it and pushed it to the Git repository. And then the pipeline just kicks off. The build goes, all the tests run, so I know that I haven't broken anything else. It deploys to a test environment, so I could actually click through it and make sure everything was all right. Okay, that's great. Let's promote it to production. And it was out in the public less than an hour after we noticed the problem. And I didn't have to talk to anybody else because that pipeline was already set up. I didn't have to stand up from my desk, go over to the team lead's room and say, hey, I need to make this change. All of that DevOps pipeline was already set up. Now, in this case, there weren't any database changes, but we did do plenty of times changes to the schema and just rolled that out exactly the same way. So, look, the benefits are huge. It means that I don't have to physically be in a location with the rest of my team to be able to get work done. The challenges, of course, is if you don't have that set up already, and now suddenly everybody's working from home. Because a big part of DevOps is this ownership, this kind of collaboration with the rest of your team as well. And if nobody is in the same room anymore, it makes those a little bit more challenging to have those kind of conversations with people, just the ad hoc conversations especially. It means that you might jump on Teams or you might jump on a video call or something like that, and people's comfort level with that isn't all the same. I'm very comfortable with it. I've been doing it for ages. I've worked remote for about 10 years, but that's certainly not the same for everybody else. And I'm speaking to you here on like a fancy mic with a light there. So I've got kind of good equipment here, but a lot of people have, a webcam on their laptop and poor sound quality and kids screaming in the background, and that gives other challenges as well. So the reality of the situation is it may not be a perfect work environment for anybody at the moment. So all of these good practices and the pipelines and things like that can enable that work to just happen, to allow you to focus on the things that you are good at, whether that be, your DBA tasks or your software development or your machine learning projects or whatever it is. These good DevOps situations, these good DevOps environments and techniques and processes can make it easy for you to focus on that work, whether you're in the office or at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, the last 6 months have just been, crazy for everyone. And it has been interesting what precipitates out of that. And, I run my own company And when COVID was just sort of hitting, New Zealand was about to go into lockdown, and I was in Canada, so I had to quickly come home. And I actually thought, I'm gonna, I had to really come home really quickly. They closed the borders 2 days after I got back, and I thought, what's going to happen? And it's been really cool in some respects, because some companies have got on board with it and actually said, you know what? We've got a problem here because we're doing all this manual work and it's not working, and it's been really good. I picked up new clients because they actually saw the value in actually embracing, automation, embracing, infrastructure as code, because it's really hard to do that remotely. And I guess the challenges of that are that, you do have to have the right mindset, because that's definitely, I always say, you can have the best tools in the world, but if you don't have process and your people are not on board, it's going to fail.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, it's been interesting because companies, the companies that, I've been working with are like, okay, we want to get on this DevOps train, right? Take us on the journey. And I mean, one of the main things that I really do is collaborate. But again, it comes down to that mindset. So I have noticed certain challenges when working with companies to get them to embrace DevOps. What are some of the common challenges that you've encountered with companies, introducing DevOps? And has it changed in the past 6 months, in your opinion? So, some of the common challenges you've encountered and whether or not those have changed.
I think the common ones are largely around the cultural aspect of it. Actually, picking up their tools to do that work, the DevOps pipelines and the testing infrastructure and the infrastructure as code and all that kind of stuff. Those are relatively mature now. So actually being able to do something with these tools, it's not trivial if you don't have that experience with it. And in fact, it's not trivial a lot of the time if you do have a lot of experience with it. A lot of people who have done DevOps before, especially in traditional software development, would be familiar with when you set up a build pipeline, it's red, green. Okay, great, I finally got it. So it's not a trivial thing, but the tooling at least is mature enough that with some effort and some time, you can get a really good result. The cultural side of it is a little bit different though. We have this tendency in software and in technology in general to say, well, we've always done these things in a particular way. So there's no impetus to change it. Like, it works now. Sure, we might have an outage every now and then that takes us a little while to respond to, but they're very rare. So why would we spend days and days and months even implementing this pipeline to fix something that doesn't happen that often? And there's plenty of arguments against that. But I think the question is, if you have that pushback, especially from people whose job it is, I guess, to approve changes and be that bottleneck's not the right word, but be that kind of gatekeeper to make sure that changes are checked and verified before they go into production. There can be a lot of pushback to making all of that stuff a bit more automated. The second part of that you asked was about whether that's changed in the last 6 months. And I think, calling back to that first question we spoke about as well, I think the fact that everybody is remote has certainly kind of reduced that pushback a little bit in a lot of organizations. The idea that you have to go around to the desk of the manager for each department and get them to sign a bit of paper before something can go live. Like, we can't do that now. So automating those tools, or, back in the old days when we used to pick up a USB stick, or even older, stack of floppy disks or something, go into the server room and update the software. Like, you can't do that now. You're at home. Everybody's working from home. So being able to automate that stuff, have infrastructure that you can spin up and spin down in code as part of your pipeline, there's a lot less pushback from that because people have realized, well, if we can't physically be somewhere, then that's kind of the way we have to operate. So at least that's reduced a bit, I think, in some companies that I've seen, that reluctance to automate. Other common challenges. I think just spending the time learning that tooling. It's a little bit cynical to say, but when you're in an office surrounded by other people, sitting there and trying something and watching tutorial videos and things like that, you don't always feel like that's something you should be doing on your work time. I think if we're at home, there's nobody watching over your shoulder. So learning how to use these tools seems a little bit more, nobody's going to know what you're doing. You may as well sit there and learn this new technology and be able to take advantage of it. I'd say that's also a cultural thing, but the training stuff as well is probably a little bit easier, I think, now that we're at home. You can pick things up and put them down whenever. It's strange that I didn't start answering this question thinking that they were all going to be positive changes, but that it does seem to be the case that you get a bit more time and you get a bit more impetus to change, to automate, if we're all remote and all at home.
I absolutely agree, because when I look back at past Hamish, and by the way, that is a hashtag on Twitter, hashtag past Hamish. I refer to that bloke every now and then because he got me where I am today, but sometimes, they're called life experiences. When I look at past Hamish 6 months ago, I was honestly, I foresaw that I was basically unemployed, because I was working for a major insurance client who had a philosophy. It was a rule: contractors cannot work from home. We had to work on site, and that changed pretty quick. It changed almost overnight. Their poor infrastructure team, because we had to do VPNs and whatever. And past Hamish, I seriously thought that it was going to be a downturn in people embracing or continuing on with either getting on with DevOps or my projects where we're sort of halfway through. But I was wrong. It actually has been a positive thing, because again, I realised pretty quick that we need to just get on with this and get all the good things out of it. And it's interesting because the cultural aspect of it is so vital. And in fact, my session later today is purely on culture. It's probably one of only 2 sessions I've ever done in my speaking career of 6 years where I don't do a demo. So I think my demo will be actually, getting people to embrace culture, but it is vital. One of the things I do actually talk about in my session is around the business case, because often I go to events or even just talking to people in general, and I'm talking to technical people who are really enthusiastic, and they see the benefit because it's going to make their work lives a heap more easier, but also more interesting and, heck, I'm going to say fun. But it's the business case, and that's sometimes the hardest thing because, we're technical people. I don't think in dollars and cents. I think in rows and columns and everything. So if people out there are thinking, okay, how do I convince, the CEO or even my manager who do think in dollars and cents at the time? Are there some key elements that you would recommend that people look at, when they have to convince management or make that business case?
Yeah, I've actually got a whole talk that I do on this, which is called, I think the title speaks for itself, but it's Doing DevOps as a Politically Powerless Developer. And it's targeted at software developers. But the idea is, if you want to make big organizational changes, you always feel like you have to be the people at the top, or you have to at least get the buy-in from the people at the top. And that's largely true. Like, You can't change your org chart from down here. You have to have somebody up here who's willing to do those changes. So I talk about a few different ways of addressing it. One is the really kind of subversive, just do stuff anyway kind of way of doing things. So very similar to, especially when you're talking about with the database testing. If you went to a manager or a project manager and said, "Oh, we need this period of time taken for the tests for all of our store procedures," and they say, well, "No, you don't write tests. Just don't write the bugs in the first place, and then we don't need tests." That's one way of getting that pushback, right? But if you just did the tests anyway and built them into whatever your estimates were, then you get the improvement, and you're doing your job. Sure, it might just mean that you're estimating more of like a broader scope of your job as well. So there are some ways that you can kind of just do that good stuff anyway and just call it part of your job. That can be tricky though, especially with highly technical managers. You do at some point need the buy-in from the people above you. The easiest way to get buy-in is to show them that it works specifically for your organization, which means that if you can build a pipeline that makes all your changes automatically to a test environment, and then when they say, okay, this looks good, hit a button and it goes to the next QA environment automatically, and show them how quickly that happens, how infrequently that goes wrong. And then even if you can show them with data how much quicker it is to go from the change to your database schema or change to whatever you're changing through to your test site. And then, that might take X hours, but then the approval process and the manual deployments to get it to production takes heaps longer and is more error prone. If you can prove that data, if you can show that data, then it's very difficult to argue with. So that's another way of doing it. The third way would be for the gilded manager who's not really very hands-on, is just kind of speaking from above, I guess. And I would point at literature. There's tons of literature out there that shows very clearly, based on academic level research, that organizations with a good DevOps practice and good DevOps practices are better at software delivery, and in turn they're better at reaching their own company goals. So we're not even talking about deploying changes quicker. We're talking about meeting sales targets better. Whatever that company deems as important, if it's a software company or has a large stake in software, or a large software arm, I guess, improving that DevOps process will lead to better outcomes for whatever that company thinks. The easiest way to get that information would be the DevOps state of DevOps report. And I know there's a state of database DevOps report that comes out as well, which is probably a little bit more specific. Yeah. But there's an organization called DORA, DevOps Research and Assessment. So that's definitely one. But pretty much, if you look for anything by Dr. Nicole Forthuren, that's going to be it's going to be the money. She's an incredible researcher in this DevOps field and absolutely knows her stuff. So that's the kind of thing, the DevOps state of DevOps report, you can print it out. It's very digestible, and just leave it on your manager's desk. And it shows very clearly that improving this kind of stuff leads to more money for the company, essentially. It leads to these better outcomes, and it's worth doing. So that would be the third way, is here you go. So other people have done this research, read whatever it is. Gartner even has stuff if they're into Gartner. Dump a Gartner report on a manager's desk. That gets you somewhere. Yeah.
Nice. Funny story. Back in 2012, I actually had to make a business case. And my business case was I was going to cut time and lieu at the company I was working at. Yeah. And I convinced management that we had, in fact, that's how I got on with Octopus Deploy, because we were doing semi-scripted deploys, and I said, okay, if we spend X amount of dollars, I can cut time and lieu because we're going to automate X, Y, Z. And so I said, we're going to cut time and lieu by 50%. And, we had to spend that much, and, time in lieu was massive. I said, we can cut it by 50%. Took me 6 months to bed in everything. And along the way, after 3 months, we checked in and we checked to see if I'd achieved my 50% time in lieu target. Unfortunately, I failed. I hadn't got 50%. I'd got 100% related to deployments because we got on board and everyone's like, yeah. And the best part about that was other teams started looking at the team that I was working with, and we're going, hey, wait a second, we want some of that. Because before then, we were all getting up at 3 a.m, running horrible deploys, both on the app side and the database side, and it was pretty yuck. But, for a small amount of money, over time, Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. I was going to say that's the power of being able to show, hey, look, this stuff works. And you were able to implement it and say, look, this is working. And then you don't have to make the argument at all. Like the other teams are going to pick up that argument and say, we want to do that. We want those savings. We want that improvement. I would never have thought of time in lieu as a way of doing it, but that's great. Love it.
It may show that I worked in management for 16 years. I knew every trick in the book.
Yeah, that's great.
Case in point, I used to always get my staff to put the team lunches on their credit card because I authorised it. Anyway, we actually, if I did, my manager would authorise it and he'd go, no, don't do that. The story actually gets even better because after 5 years, we went and used Azure DevOps, which was awesome. Yeah. Nice. I thought a bit of, it was good because it's true, and also, it was really great because we had to do chatbots, and it was awesome what we're doing in Azure. Anyway, this next question is a hot one for me, and I apologise, this is a selfish question, because when I work with companies, this is an area that in the app layer, sometimes they're doing this, but oh my goodness, in the database layer, it's almost non-existent. And so I'm going to ask you, how do you see the role of monitoring evolving in DevOps?
Yeah. So, you're right. Monitoring is often kind of overlooked when it comes to DevOps. It's that we always talk about this cycle of, plan, build, test, deploy, but then we forget about the closing the loop bit about monitoring what goes on. And if people do close that loop, they close it with, oh, we've got logging. We can like print out the exceptions when something happens, or, we have tracing on the database that we can open up and see what queries are taking too long and things like that. Very kind of reactive. When something's already gone wrong, can you diagnose? It's an auditing thing, not so much a monitoring thing. But that only like addresses one side of it. That's did something explode? I think there's lately been a move more towards almost experiment-driven development or experiment-driven software delivery, where you have a theory about what a change will do for your users. So let's say the easiest thing to talk about always is like moving some UI around, but let's not talk about that. Let's talk about making a change to a schema to split some data that was in one table out to another table and see whether that improves performance as a whole. But you don't really care whether it improves performance so much. You care more about whether the user's getting a better experience out of that. So the naive way might be just throw some exception handling on it and maybe to do some tracing and say, oh, yeah, that's faster. But what you ideally want to do, and I think this is where monitoring is starting to move, or the way we do monitoring is starting to move, is people are starting to try to model that behavior in their monitoring tools to be able to say, look, our theory is if we do this, people will use this particular page more because it's going to be more responsive. So our metric is not does it explode when we do it, or is the database running faster? The metric is, are more people doing this stuff, or are more people using these pages? And that way you can try this experiment, and if it turns out that's not the case, or people don't like using that page because it means that part of the page loads later or something like that, you can track that behavior, and it's behavior driven. And this comes back to that whole definition of DevOps, the union of people, process, products to enable continuous delivery of value to your end users. And so that's delivering value. Is what you've done valuable to the end user, or is it just, is it just a change that you've made that you assume is just going to be better, right? So I think, the basic answer to the question is, I think the monitoring, or the way that people are doing it, is moving more towards, are we providing actual value to the users or to whoever we care about, rather than are we just delivering changes? I think a lot of the tooling is heading that way as well. Application Insights and Azure Monitor and things like that definitely allow you to do that stuff a bit more easily than they used to. And there's plenty of other tools out there as well. One of the other, I know there's an NZ company as well, and I'm blanking on the name. Which one was it? Sorry, Raygun. Raygun. Yeah, yes, yeah, Raygun. Yeah, so they allow you to do that kind of stuff too. And then combine that with feature flags and all sorts of stuff like that, and you can really be responsive to what's providing value and what's not providing value. I think that's the direction, personally. Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say, what I can do with Azure Monitor now is, oh my goodness, so awesome. Like, I'm working with devs, and we're this is very scary, my friend. I wrote, and I put it on Twitter, I wrote an Azure function the other weekend, because what had happened was I was using metrics to look at the vCore usage within Azure SQL database, but it was hyperscale. And so we could scale up as the metrics did X, Y, Z. And I wrote an Azure function that could do that. And that was all based on, what we were monitoring. And the devs kind of looked at it and went, even though it was remote, I knew that they were like, thanks, Hamish, we'll take it from here. But that's collaboration, right? I'm not going to let them touch my database, though. No, of course not. Fair enough. No, actually, that's a good point, though. I do let developers touch the database, because I'm going to spin that database up in source control, and I hope they break it on their own machine. Prod, different story. I wouldn't even let me near the prod server, and I shouldn't be, right? It's automatically deployed. No. There's a person, Charity Majors, who works at honeycomb.io, and Charity writes about observability, and I really, whenever I want to get enthused about where I need to go with what I'm doing, I read anything from Charity, and she wrote a great book, actually. And I hope one day to actually either meet her or speak on the same event. And it's around database reliability engineering. So it's taking that site reliability engineering stuff that Google sort of created, and fitting it towards database, and it's really awesome. So here's the deal, because one of the things I'm always thinking about, and this might be a bit too far out, but let's go with it, because if I look back to what I was doing 2 years ago, even on the Azure platform, to what I'm doing now, I've got a step change. If you'd asked past Hamish, you said, hey mate, you're going to write an Azure function, Hamish would be like, hold on. Why?
Not my job.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I'd just be scared of what I do. But what changes do you see transforming DevOps in the enterprise over the next 2 to 5 years? I think 5 years is pretty far out there. So
Yeah.
next 2 to 5 years.
I think one of the parallels that goes really closely along with DevOps, and basically all of these new process things, is cloud. And yes, I'm a little bit biased. I work for a cloud, basically. Azure is my employer, you could say. But it's difficult to do a lot of these good practices without putting your infrastructure and even your compute and things on the cloud, whether that be Azure or anyone else. I'd obviously want you to use Azure, but if you're already using other clouds and you're perfectly happy, fantastic, good work. Keep using them. Yeah, so I think more adoption of the cloud is certainly one thing that's going to continue over the next little while, and we've probably seen the stats. There's continued growth in all of the clouds. Yeah, so that's one big thing. The other thing I think is the way that the enterprise manages their software is kind of broadening, I think, and this kind of ties back. I know you mentioned in that intro that I specialize in DevOps and then lately MLOps for the past couple of years. And AI and machine learning and things like that are becoming far more accessible, especially to the enterprise. I mean, you used to need a team of data scientists to do anything. And now, you can add handwriting recognition to your app by making an API call. Like it's borderline trivial. But that's one side of it. You can just make API calls and do that stuff. But the state of the art with machine learning and data science and that kind of thing, because of the cloud and the availability of powerful compute and the prevalence of huge amounts of data and the amount of data that we're capturing, means that these kind of data-driven projects, I guess, or data-driven components to applications are becoming more of a part of your everyday applications. So not just yes, we're storing all of this data in our database, but what can we glean from that data? What information can we gather? Can we do some cluster analysis and lead to give us some ideas about better ways we can structure our products and things like that? Now, as that becomes more prevalent, I think those projects are going to have to mature as well, like the way that we handle those projects, which is where something like MLOps comes in. And DataOps is a really popular term as well. Rather than DataOps being a DBA or a data specialist with access to a database, running their own queries and coming up with their own insights, and then saying, here you go, here's a query that'll tell you what you need. Actually having a similar kind of pipeline to be able to push something like operationalize some data exercise out to a production system. Those same kinds of pipelines are going to need to exist as well. So I think that's one thing. The enterprise is moving, or can move, I guess, more to that data-driven insights kind of aspect. And as that matures, the DevOps kind of stuff starts to encapsulate that area as well. That's kind of an overlap of my personal interests, I think. In terms of your traditional DevOps, traditional software development, I think it's just more improvements on the tooling and your ability to do things. It hasn't reached a peak yet, I don't think. It's much easier to do things than it was before, but there's still plenty to come. I mean, just go and have a look in any of those tools for some fringe kind of tasks that you might want to do, and they're not necessarily there. You can do them, but you might be writing a bit of your own code. Nothing wrong with that, but maybe the tool expands to include that kind of stuff in the future anyway. So I think that's pretty much the answer, I guess, or my answer, I think.
I absolutely agree. And the really cool thing, and one of the reasons I talked to before with the company I worked at, we got on Azure DevOps, and the reason being is because we're doing some stuff with cognitive services and chatbots and whatever. And the funny thing was, so we also had some projects doing machine learning, and so we used Azure DevOps to deploy machine learning stuff. Whereas I see it going full circle, because when I work with companies and we're going to spin up the database, and we'll do it in Azure, right? Azure SQL database, out of the box, I've got transparent data encryption. I've got query store. I've got, dynamic masking, all these things as default. And the best thing is I have tuning recommendations, and the algorithms to do that are based on machine learning. And so personally, I'm excited because I think future Hamish, I never talk about that guy because he's not here yet, but I think future Hamish, we're going to use machine learning to help DevOps. And all this data, we need something underneath to make information from all this data. I don't know. I think it will be awesome.
There's this whole area of, so this is there's two terms. There's ML ops and AI ops, which get confused a little bit. AI ops is that other way around, where you're using artificial intelligence to improve your DevOps or to work with your DevOps processes. And kind of your canonical example, or the easiest example is, hey, here's all of my logs or my network traffic. Can you just let me know when something strange happens? And that's an AI and ML thing called anomaly detection, which is just a thing that's relatively mature now. Like you can pretty much, I don't know the tools exactly, but you can pretty much just point at your log stream and say, train on that, and then tell me when something's weird. And there you go. Now you've got some kind of reactive monitoring that's very quick. But you can do that for, there's ideas around what tests are impacted by the changes I just made. Have I done anything that dramatically changes the available flow between pages of my website without having to predetermine what that actually means? Just can you look at this and tell me, is something strange? That kind of stuff. But like you're mentioning, the performance, the tuning recommendations are all based on ML. So it's this weird full circle synchronicity thing. Yeah, it's great.
It really is. And you know what? I love to be a part of it. And also, it's almost like that feeling when I first, years ago, I introduced people to Query Store, but we had to wait till 2016, right? But the thing was, it was baked into Azure before then, and it was like Christmas. You show you, look, we did all this great stuff with your database. And I'm really, really looking forward to, people embracing more of the cloud, and also incorporating some of that predictive and learning stuff. A book I've been reading, The Data Kitchen, and you just reminded me when you're talking about data ops. The Data Kitchen is a really awesome book. And in fact, there's a website. It's almost like kind of a philosophy. And the funny thing is, I had someone who works at an insurance company, and generally insurance companies, they move at a slow pace. Well, 6 months ago, when stuff like what we're going through happened, they actually started looking, okay, how can we do things better? And they were like, hey, Hamish, can you go, have you heard about the Data Kitchen? And I was like, no. Went and read it, and I was like, oh my goodness. And the cool thing is, and again, this comes down to culture, they're looking at different ways. Like I had been, oh my goodness, for a year working at this company, I had been harking on about unit testing. They gave me a developer. I've never actually met the developer in person because, it's been 4 months ago. And never actually met in person. And this developer's helping, me with unit testing. And as you well know, I love a bit of unit testing. One other thing I love doing, and one of the reasons why I am a friend of Redgate is because they give me the tools that I can actually bridge a gap. Because for too long, DBAs and database developers, but more DBAs, and I'm not picking on DBAs because I used to be one. Nowadays, I'm more a data engineer, but that's cool. So DBAs, one of the hardest things I ever have to do with them, believe it or not, forget unit testing, is actually saying the word Git. And in fact, source control, right? And I have an anecdotal statement that I'm going to make, but when you're working with clients, because one of the things I have to do is introduce DBAs to what source control is. And if I mention the word branching, the face changes. So, what are some of the branching strategies that you see that work well with clients?
Branching strategies, it's difficult with data, but I'm a firm believer that everything should be in source control. And when I say everything, I mean schema essentially, and look up data and things like that, maybe depending on its size. Don't put your 5 terabyte database in a Git repo. That's not going to work. That said, there are some tools starting to come out that give you versioning capabilities for databases or for data, I guess. There's a few that I'm only just starting to learn about some of these, so it's going to be difficult for me to give any recommendations. But some that I heard are DVC or data version control. There's another one, a full kind of end-to-end ML tool called Pachyderm, which is a great name, the elephant never forgets thing. But they work very much like Git. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. That's versioning data. The branching strategies, though, all the ones that kind of work in really good DevOps practices are almost trunk-based. So staying as close to that main branch as you possibly can. Now, that doesn't mean, and in fact, my preferred way is not just pushing stuff straight into your main branch or your trunk or your master or whatever you call it. My preferred way would be to have that main branch and then have very short-lived feature branches from that. And by short-lived, I mean a few days, maybe. The tendency then, so basically, if you've got this main branch, that should be your protected one, the one that always contains code and database schemas and things like that you can deploy, the infrastructure that you can deploy straight away. When you make a change, you branch, and then you do whatever changes you need to make, and then you submit a pull request back into that main branch. And then that obviously will run your builds and tests and things like that to make sure everything still works. And then you merge that back into your main branch. Now, doing that sounds easy. And if you're very careful about it, and if you have a very dedicated kind of skilled team who knows what stuff can change, what stuff can't, and the architecture of your application lends itself to being able to replace segments rather than right over the top of stuff and all this other software development stuff, which is almost never the case, then it can work really, really well. The merge itself, though, doesn't always go that nicely. The difficulty is if your branch has come off and you've been working on that for 3 months, and then you go to merge it back into your main branch, that main branch has almost certainly changed a lot from when you based your changes from, which means that merge is going to be harder and harder. So the idea of trunk-based development is any kind of merge that goes back into your main trunk branch should be small changes done frequently, because that makes the merge much, much easier. There's actually a website, trunkbaseddevelopment.com, which basically goes through all of this stuff. And I mentioned the State of DevOps report. There is some research in that report as well that basically shows the closer you are to your main branch, the better your outcomes are, ultimately. The fewer failed changes there are in production, and the quicker you can respond if there are problems. So as close to trunk as possible, as close to your main branch as possible, with short-lived feature branches and a pull request process that runs through a pipeline. I could talk obviously for days on this, but
So I have a flip side of keeping it close. So I always talk to clients about your level of insanity is directly proportional to how far you've branched off from the main trunk.
Yep, that resonates for sure.
Oh yeah, I've been there. I've seen some horrible situations. Like people like have spent 3 to 6 months trying to merge at one branch. I'm like, you know what? Delete it. Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
it's horrible. And it adheres to some of the tenets of continuous delivery, which is, small incremental updates. So, work on it, push it out, test, what have you. It's funny, you're talking about the terabyte database data and source control. I actually worked with a client who were like, okay, we don't understand the source control thing, but we've got our database and source control. I said, oh yeah, cool, show me. And it was literally the backup files. So they're taking a backup. And I went, you know what, I'm not going to judge because at least you've got something. But by the way, here's some other, things we can do. I also say to DBAs, look, I can show you 6 to 8 commands in Git that, you're probably only going to use 4 of them, but here's the other 4 when things get in, if you're in trouble. And by the way, if you get in true trouble, hi, I'm Hamish Watson. I'm here to help. That whole thing, I'm a collaborative person. I have had so many horrible experiences with source control that I don't want you to have them. So call me any time of day. But honestly, like it's like a little light bulb goes off when you're like, okay, run this command to do this, and here's a document, a very simple one. And by the way, if you can't run 8 different PowerShell commands or Bash, I don't care. If you can't run those 8 commands and understand that, what are you doing to my data? Because you learned your language one day. I learned English pretty badly, but I learned a language. I'm teaching you 8. You know what I mean? But yeah, that is awesome. I totally agree. Like there's Git flow and GitHub flow and all different ways, but I think you summed it up so well in that just keep the branches short-lived, a couple of days at most, merge it back in, and you'll be away laughing. Alrighty, I'm just going to look through the questions, and we've probably got about a couple of minutes left to our next session.
You were talking about as well. I just thought I'd inject this as well. There's a book by Gene Kim called The Phoenix Project, and then there's another one which came out not too long ago called The Unicorn Project. And he actually talks about these merge parties that they have, which are these it was a triggering read for me. It gave me flashbacks to so many different companies that I've been in where they try to merge all these changes in at once in a gigantic room full of people and nothing works and it breaks in production, all that sort of stuff. The reason I mention it though is that the Unicorn Project has a little bit more of a focus on data in the final third of that book. And so it's probably a little bit more relevant than the Phoenix Project, which is great. The other thing is it's kind of a textbook, like it's kind of it's a technical book, but it's written like a novel, which means that it's not a hard read at all. But it addresses a lot of those things that you were talking about, accessibility to that data and the merge parties and the changes to data and making that stuff available and all that kind of stuff. It's a good read. I'd recommend it.
Yeah. It's 2 things I'm talking about in my session later on culture. I directly quote Donovan, the Union of People, Process and Product. Is such a succinct way, and I use it with clients. The other one is I talk about unicorns, which is just cool.
Yeah. I'm not spoiling everything for your one.
No, it's all good. I'm trying to get people to hang around for my session because the minute, technical people see the word culture, they're like, culture.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. No. All good. Look, what's one one sort of takeaway thing that you would that you like to finish off with for the attendees?
I think so I'll tell you a little bit of a story. When I started to go into ML ops, because my background is in traditional software development. It's not in machine learning at all. I had some introduction to machine learning when I was at university, and it involved like multi-dimensional calculus. And that's not me, right? I'm okay. I can add some numbers up. That's fine. But once you start getting into derivatives and stuff like that, so it was really inaccessible for a while. I started moving back and looking at it again when I worked for Microsoft, mainly because I started working alongside a whole bunch of advocates who are machine learning experts. So they're also machine learning experts, but they're also advocates and really good at explaining things. So I started to learn what it was and what it wasn't. But when I started looking at it, my initial thought was before I started looking at it, I was thinking, well, it's just machine learning. It's just training a model and getting some software to push out. Surely we can apply DevOps to it. And then when I started looking at what the day-to-day looks like in a machine learning project, my reaction kind of went the other way. And I was like, well, we can't do DevOps with this. It's so different. The cadence is different. There's all this experimentation that happens. But then I got into it more and more, and I started seeing parallels and started thinking, well, no, actually, we're going back to that first direction. It is totally doable as long as you don't run your training runs on a build server now, like every single time you make a change. And what I realized is all of the best practices and things that we recommend for different projects are all based on these core tenets of DevOps, which is basically making sure that you're delivering value out to your customers in a continuous way. So if you have a change that is going to provide value, A, make sure you can tell whether it is providing value, but B, get that change out to them as quickly as possible. And that means making sure that it doesn't contain any bugs, that it's all tested and so on, but do that in an automated way if you can. Push it out to the production in an automated way. Wrap it in a feature flag maybe so that you can turn it off if something's gone wrong and go back to the drawing board. But all of it is built around that same idea of, continuous delivery. So delivering to production, in a continuous way to deliver value. And I think if you just stick to those core tenets, you can come up with your own strategies and your own technologies to solve those problems. You look at the different tooling that's available and think about what you're actually trying to achieve, and that's DevOps. It's not buying a product. It's not it's not doing a stand up every morning. That might help. It might not help. So I think keeping those core tenets in mind is the number one takeaway. I think you don't have to just follow the bouncing ball from DevOps practitioners to say this is what I should do, and this is what they said I should do. This is therefore what I am going to implement. Think about what you're trying to do. Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome and so true. Well, look, my friend, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you part of this today. I'm really honoured that Redgate would let me be host, and it's really awesome talking to you. You got some really
great to chat.
Great.
It's been a little while.
It has, yeah. And hopefully, some stage in the future, we'll be able to do it in person. But look, take care. And thank you again.